It's about time. It's almost 4:30. I guess I'll get started. Hi, my name is Jacob Morin. I'm an intern developer at Redfin Solutions. We're based out of Portland, Maine. I currently attend the University of Maine in Orono as a computer science student. And I'm here to give you a guide on how to get started with React Native. This guide, I'm going to assume...
I think you're supposed to hit that button.
Yep, it's awesome. Red. We're good.
Oh, it is? Oh,
we're good. Yeah, sure. So this guy's going to assume you know some basic JS and not much else. Zero to hero kind of thing. So I'm going to start. What is it? React Native is a framework. In one sentence, it's basically a framework that lets you build a mobile app using React components, the same kind of thing you've been using on web pages before. Some of you might not have too much experience with React. What's React? React is some libraries built by Facebook, and there's three main tenets in mind that I want to keep in mind through this guide. The first, declarative design. Declarative is fancy jargon. It just means what you see is what you get. Kind of like with HTML, you write a P tag, you get a paragraph. You write a H tag, you get a header. It's very simple. You see the code, it's what you get on the page. Second, and probably the most important of the three, component-based UI. When you build an app using React Native, you will be building it sort of like a piece of paper, and you're going to be building components. And the screen is just going to be a collection of components more than one huge amalgamation of code. And the third tenet is reusability. And that closely ties in with the second tenet, because once you build a component and you build a self-contained, self-styled component in React Native, you can put it on any screen. It'll work the same. So you build it once, you can drop it on the home page, the about page, wherever you want to put it. It will always work the same. You don't have to write it twice. So now that I've sold you on it, what do you need to get started? Not much. You need Node 10, which I'm sure most of you know how to get. You need the ability to use a command line, which I'm sure most of you can do. And depending on the route you choose when building the app, you might need Android Studio or Xcode, depending on whether or not you want to deploy to Android devices or Apple devices or both. How do you start? As I said before, there's routes you can take. There's two routes you can pick when you start developing an app. There's a React Native CLI, and there's a cool open source tool called Expo Tools. So the React Native CLI, this shipped with React Native. It came with it. It's easier for people who have built apps and want to get into React Native. So the thing about React Native CLI is it puts all the responsibility on you. You've got to know all of the bits about developing an app, how all the Gradle building and Android stuff, all the gross stuff that is in the background when you build an app. And if you choose this route, you are going to need Android Studio or Xcode to mess with all that background stuff. The other route, Expo Tools. This is an open source framework library you can use. It's a CLI. It's very easy to use. It's very nice. It hides most of the gross stuff that you never really need to see. And for that reason, you don't need Android Studio, you don't need Xcode. And it streamlines that workflow. It's not without limitations. There's definitely a lot of times where you would choose React Native CLI over Expo. One of the situations is if you have a lot of permissions that need to go really deep into the system. So if you have a Bluetooth reliant app, Expo doesn't currently really support Bluetooth very well. So it would be easier to dig into it yourself with the React Native CLI instead of Expo. But I recommend whenever you can, use Expo, because Expo is great and I've been loving it. It's such a streamlined development experience. Some more about Expo. Expo has this great feature where when I'm developing on my laptop and I want to make a development build to check how it looks out on a real device, I can create a tunnel through LAN, or there's a few different options you can use, but I always use through LAN. You can create a tunnel from your laptop and build it right on your phone. There's no wires required. You can also set up an account with Expo and it's hooked up to your account, so only you can get in and see your own development apps. It's very, very nice and very convenient to use. React Native innately has a hot swap feature where anytime you change the source files of an app you're developing, it will rebuild the JS on whatever dev build you currently have open on your phone. Expo supports this, and it supports it through that tunnel I was just talking about. So if on my laptop I change text or I change some component, my phone over here, as soon as I save the file, will update to have that new change. And that makes it very easy and very quick to develop with Expo. It also has a thing called ejection, where if you start building with Expo and you find out, crap, I have to use Bluetooth, and for that, I can't use Expo. You can eject an Expo project and turn it into a React Native CLI project. So you can always ditch Expo and go back to React Native CLI if you need it. So, ES6 and JSX. These are, for me, when I started learning React Native, the two newest things to me. They were the two big things I had to learn before I could really get into the flow of development. ES6 is the new next-gen framework for JS. It's really cool. It's got a lot of cool features, easy imports. I import React from React. Very easy to write, very easy to read. And it's also got these things called promises, which makes it great for pulling in data, which is something I did in an app I built recently for the Child Nutrition Outreach Program in Massachusetts. You can use the async and await keywords to have it pause and wait when you're pulling in a ton of data from some REST export or something. Now, you can use ES6 because React Native has Babel built in under the hood. So Babel will translate all of your cool, nice-looking ES6 into ES5, and then everybody can use ES5, so it's great. I'm sure a lot of you have used Babel before, but up here you can see there's an example. I use a cool temperate literal, and then it turns into the concat mess that's required in ES5. Now, JSX. JSX is this cool thing where you can build XML in your JS. It looks a lot like HTML, and a lot of times you're going to find that you're going to use it in the same way that you use HTML. So here, anytime I have these sideways carrots to create tags, these are all XML. This is JSX. And this is what you're going to be using to output your components. You're going to output JSX. And the JSX, each tag is a component. You can make components. There are lots that come with it. It's really great. And yeah, there's a lot of similarities with HTML. Anytime you use a div or a span when creating a web page, you now use a view, or a scroll view if you want it to scroll. Anytime you want text, like you would a paragraph or a header or bold text or small text, you just use the text tag and add styling to it. So, prop, state, and render. These are three very important concepts to understand when you're working with React Native. Every component has props, state, and the render function. Props, I just think of them as parameters. Props get passed in when you create the component, and they never change after that. They're always set to that first value that you put in when you create it. So, for example, if you have an image component, the URL you pass in for the image is a prop because you pass it in when you create it, and it's always going to be the same. State is for things that do change. So I have the example here of a search bar, the text inside of the search bar. You expect the user to enter text, delete text, copy text in there. It's going to change. And for that, the state, as in the state of the component, will store that text and store the changes to the text. Render. Render is where you're actually going to be building and outputting your component, because every time you build the component class, it's required to have the render method. This render method usually is just simple JSX like this. I create a view, I put a text component in it, and I put text inside the text component. This is just an empty view that says hello world in the middle with no styling. This is about as simple as it gets, but this is also what more complicated stuff looks like. You just have more nesting. Now, React Native is really smart. Whenever the state of a component changes, like on a search bar when you change the text inside of it, or you change the off or on switch on a light bulb component, it will re-render it. And it will only re-render the things that have a state change. So it doesn't have to reload everything, and it will only find the differences since the state change and then fix those, which is very good for performance. So it's really fast, and the state is a really easy way to store all those things that change really fast and make it really responsive. So there's a lot of important components. I'm going to go over a few of them quickly. There's obviously tons, and there's even more in libraries that you can pull in from wherever you find libraries. There's lots of good places to find them online. But these are some of the ones you're almost always going to use. Views, they're divs. They're places where you can put all of the components together in a box. A scroll view is the same thing as a view, except when it gets big enough and you put enough stuff in it, it will automatically add a little scroll bar to the side and you can scroll up like you intuitively would with any app. And then there's text, which is a text box. You can style that however you want. There's text inputs, which the user can put text in there, and that's stored in the state. And you can pull out the text that's currently in there through the state. Accessing the state, you would just say this.state.text, pull it out, and do whatever you want with it. Then there's buttons, sliders, switches. You can access the phone's camera roll. You can create links. They're all documented on the React Native docs if you want to read more about them. I'm just going to list them here because you're probably going to run into them at some point or another. And anything else you want. Creating a component is really easy. It's just a class. You export the class and you import it wherever you want to use it. The only thing that a component requires is that render method, and that's what tells it what to show when it renders the component. Other than that, you can put anything you want in there. You can do whatever you want with the components. Styling, I've mentioned it a few times now, and you're going to find it really familiar if you ever use CSS, because in React Native, styling, it's just like CSS in its own style sheet. So, importantly, before I get into the styling, each component has self-contained styling. And that's why you can pick up a component and drop it on any page and it works. So whenever you create a component, what I usually do is create this const style sheet on the bottom that contains all the styling that I might need. And that's carried with it on whatever page is dropped on. Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick introduction. So it's all inline, so to speak?
Yes, it's all included within the component when you build it. So it's not necessarily inline in that you put it in the JSX. Like you'll see here, I create the style sheet, and then I call the style sheet values here. I say use red. In this case, there's only one thing in red, but you call it like that. This would be on the bottom usually. It doesn't really matter where it is, but usually on the bottom of the component, there's the style sheet that extends and has all the styles. And in the JSX, this is a style prop. Every component has a style prop, and you just pass in that style sheet value. You can also do it inline. So here you can say style and then pass in an object that just says color red. So you don't have to use a style sheet, but if you want to be organized, I really recommend using the style sheet. You can also pass in multiple styles, which is what I do in these bottom two. Whenever you pass in an array of styles, it will apply them from first to last. So here I apply red and then I apply big blue. The text is going to come out as big and blue because big and blue is the last one. But where I apply big blue and then red, the text is going to be big and red because it never overwrites that big. And that's convenient if you want to combine different styles whenever that has to happen. You don't have to create a new style just to combine two things. It makes it easy to style, really. All right, so you've built your components, you've created your views, you put them all on the screen, your app looks good, and now you want to build it. I'm going to talk about building it through Expo, because building it through Expo is really easy. Building it through React Native, the CLI, is also easy if you know what you're doing. You have to do a lot of manual creation of keys and whatnot to get it on the Google Play Store if you do it manually through the React Native CLI. And that's a really complicated rabbit hole that I don't really want to get into right now, but there's plenty of documentation on the Android sites if you want to look that up. So when you build an Expo, you tell it, build Android or build iOS. And what it's going to do is it's going to ask you if you have a key store you want to pass in. Because if you deploy an app to Android Play Store or to the Apple Store, it's going to use a key to make sure that all of your APKs or IPAs, depending on what store, are all signed the same. So it's going to ask you if you have one you want to use. If you don't have one, which is what's usually going to happen if you're creating a new app and you're putting it on the store for the first time, Expo will create one for you, and then you can get it later. But if you ever build an app that was not previously in React Native and you're rebuilding it in React Native and you want to push it out as an update, you can take the old key store and give it to Expo, and then it will sign it the same way that the old app was. So you can push it out as a update. You don't have to create a new app on the Play Store. After you build, and this is very important, you're going to want to fetch the key store if you let it create it for you. Because the key store is very important for security. You can fetch the key store for Android or the certifications for iOS. The general standard is to have a separate private repository to store your certifications, but it's up to you where you want to store them. Just make sure that they're safe so that nobody can upload their own version of your app onto the store. But after you've fetched your certs and you've fetched your key stores and the app is built, you're done. You've got an app. That's as easy as it is to make a React Native app. It's a lot simpler than I thought it was when I started, and it's actually really fun to do. It's a lot more fun than other mobile development I've ever done. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, now's the time.
That's it?
Yeah, that's all you need to do.
Wow. I mean, really, I'm speechless because I came in here, really expecting some complex coding, but it seems like it's a lot more simple than expected, and as user-friendly as it gets, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it gets as complex as you want it to be. If you just want it to say hello world, it's as easy as pie. But if you want to do very complicated things, it's just as complicated as anything else. So
Yeah, the syntax itself is in simple English, which I guess is really why.
yeah, it's very readable. I love the way it looks. Like scrolling through my code, it makes me feel so good. It's so nice.
Wow. Can you show an example? Can you show some examples, maybe from?
Yeah, please.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't
here.
care if you show an anecdote for.
Let me.
Yeah.
Let's go for an easy one. Here's, yeah, you guys can see this. Can everybody see this, or is the text too small?
Yeah.
How about that? All right.
Yeah, that's good.
So this is tab bar icon. It's used in React Native navigation. That's a library you can pull in. It's just a little icon that goes in the navigation bar. It's a very simple one. This is all it looks like. And all it has is the render, because all it is an icon to render. It's a very easy component to make. You can see when you return the render, it's gonna. This is just one JSX tag, and this is a little bit of cool syntax you can do. If you have a component that's always empty, there's no text in it, you can end it with a slash and then the last caret. You don't have to do an extra slash ending tag. It takes these 4 props. This is where you put in props. It takes a size, a name, a style, all the usual things you would expect. You just pass them in. It's very easy. This actually is a very cool thing. These curly braces you see inside of the JSX, these escape the JSX. if you're writing JSX and you're creating component tags and whatnot, and you want to go back and refer to something that's in your JavaScript, if you put it in between curly braces, it'll escape the JSX, and you can refer to the JavaScript variables as however you want. So here, instead of being literally 26, it goes back and it becomes the number 26. Here, it refers to this, which normally you wouldn't be able to do in JSX, but it escapes with the curly braces. This props name, so it pulls in the name that's given when you get to the props. That's a very simple one. I've got a pretty big component here where I do a lot of Google searching. Don't judge my code, please. But here's a big render that I do, because this is one where I build a Google search autocomplete that will autofill an address when you type it in, and then it displays a list underneath it. So it's one component, but this is a very dense component, and it has a lot of stuff in it, but you'll see it still follows all the stuff I was talking about. It's still very simple. This is just one really big component that has a lot of props in it for all the stuff that you would need. Another component, I didn't mention it when I went over the important ones, flat list. It's kind of like a scroll view, but it's very well optimized. It will only think about the stuff that's currently on the screen. The rest of it is out of its brain. It's out of sight, out of mind. So the performance is great, because it only has to render or think about the 3 things that are on the screen, even if your list is 2,000 long. So that is very nice. It makes all the lists really responsive when I, accidentally make the list 1,000 long because I messed up somewhere in the code. But yeah, it's really just that simple. It's easy. It looks nice. I love writing it. It's just a good time. Yeah, sure.
A comment and a question. Maybe you might want to change your API key after this.
Yeah, maybe.
And a question.
This hasn't been code reviewed yet, Marissa.
Yeah.
Is it possible to use the same components between React DOM and React Native?
I'm actually not sure about that. I know you can't pull in React libraries into React Native very easily. I know you can convert them, but you have to do that manually and then create an equivalent React Native library to pull in. So I know that because I was trying to find a few things in React Native. I found things in React that did kind of what I wanted, but then not the things that I wanted in React Native. So I had to create a React Native library to do it. So some are probably really easy to convert. Some very simple React components are probably very easy to convert to React Native. But I don't think, in general, it's not compatible, really.
Thank you.
Yes?
So what are the big differences using Expo and React Native versus just doing an app in Eclipse?
Excuse me?
I did an app in Eclipse. You
Oh,
write it and then you,
like the IDE?
Yeah.
Oh,
And then, but I didn't have to go out and publish or anything like that. You said you have to go through this process and you publish to a key. Does that go out for verification before it ends up on your phone?
you mean when you're building the app? When I go over the build process, I'm assuming that you're pushing the app onto the Google Play Store and whatnot. So to do that, you need to sign it with a key store. So you either need to generate one, or you need to have one to give it. If you don't have a key store, you can't upload to the Google Play Store, as far as I know, because it yells at me if I try.
Right, well, but in Eclipse, you don't have to have a key. You can go straight to your phone, but I can't distribute it to anybody.
Yes.
Or a app.
Yeah, when I was talking about the features,
Yeah.
do you use Expo Start and just
I haven't done
launch like that?
anything like that, yeah.
Oh, okay. But yeah, when I was talking about the tunnel, the development builds on my phone,
Okay.
all I would do is I would go into the directory and I'd do Expo Start, and that command just creates a tunnel that leads to your phone if it's hooked up, and then it will build the JS on your phone right there. So you don't need a key if it's a development build through the tunnel.
Okay.
You do need the key if you're trying to push it onto a store and actually put it in production.
Cool. That's what I was saying. Thank you.
Can you show, is any of this interacting with Drupal yet? So
Yeah,
Drupal,
actually.
we have to show, it's one of the things where
So the way that I made it interact with Drupal is through I think it's called the REST export module. where I created a view that had this is for CNOP, the Child Nutrition Outreach Program, and the view contained meal sites. As you can see, this is also from the example. The URL, I go to where that REST export is, and I wait for fetch to grab the CSV. We use CSVs just because that's the standard for them. I pull off the CSV and it waits for it to get all of the 700 to 1,000 sites, and then it turns into text, it parses it, and then I use the object later on to make a list. So that's how I made this app interact with Drupal, was just through a REST export.
Do you have an emulator set up that you could show, or you're not prepared for that?
I don't have one set up on this computer. I might be able to get it to work on my phone, but I kinda had to reinstall the OS this morning, so I don't know where anything is.
That's fine.
Yeah, maybe after, if a few people come up, I may be able to get it to work, but I don't know if I can get it to work right now.
The general premise of the app is there's summer meal sites all around the state of Massachusetts where kids who are on free and reduced lunch, if they're at school, they need these meals during the summer as well. So you can pull up this app, it'll sort of geolocate the address you enter and then find the nearest meal sites, which is that CSV that's getting pulled out of Drupal because all those sites are managed in Drupal.
Yep.
Great.